this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. I'm just basically sticking the camera on. There might be some quiet bits. I'm incredibly tired, and quite honestly this is a daft idea because I am so tired. It's late in the day, but if I don't film this there won't be any videos for some time because I'll be just too busy. Now I'm hoping to get away with some things here. You won't see that very often with me. This is my chunky bark that was rescued from the holey clay pots that the Cattleyas originally came out of. It's wet because it's just been sterilised by having 2 lots of boiling water poured over it and then drained off, and it's still slightly warm in places, but it's cool enough just to get some roots in. And it'll also save me watering them for a few days because obviously it will have absorbed some. Now I'm hoping, this is probably the only one that's going back in a holey clay pot. This has actually got quite a good root system, and I'm hoping to get away with not wiring it in. I'm hoping to get away with just putting it in that pot and putting some media in and sort of slotting it down in between the roots. Just literally pushing it down in the gaps. Manually. This is a piece at a time, so this is very large bark. And the idea is that it should, as the number of pieces increases, it should bind, you know, they jam together basically. And they may squash a few roots as well, but nothing dramatic. It's actually an active root system, this is, it's actually on the go. So you know, if there's an odd root that's get cracked or something, it's probably going to branch because it's in active growth. But this is the place where the most new growths are, just where I am now. So this is the bit where I need to be extra careful because there is actually new root tips just there. So what I'm going to do is find some smaller pieces and just tuck them in under where those roots are. They're loose, they're not getting jammed in. Now all I need to do now is check, is this plant firm enough? The answer is yes, so that's one done. I'm just going to get another more small pieces. I just need a little bit there, just so that there's something for those roots to grab hold of, not spending too long in the air before they grab hold of something. I think that'll probably do. So there's plenty of air in there, plenty of air, and we have the security of the pieces sort of wedged together to hold the plant still. So I think we'll be okay. Yeah, that's firm enough. So that's one done. That'll probably be the only one in a holey clay pot. Now, this is 2 pieces of the same, both with poor root systems, but both effectively. I mean, this is a new growth that hasn't produced its new roots to any great extent, and that's a new growth. The same again, really. So I'm just going to put these in the same pot. And they're going to go in something like that, but we're going to do something a bit different. Obviously some bark in the bottom. These holes aren't big enough for the bark to fall out, so that's just something in the bottom. Yeah, I was just going to say, has it got holes in the bottom? Yes, it has. I did have one of these plastic pots once. It actually had a solid bottom. So when you watered it, it all like weed out of the sides all over your feet. Right, so these are just going to go in like that. But they're not going in just like that because I want to do something a bit different. That's why the moss is here. What I want is that the centre of the pot has moss in it. This airy live moss, preferably minus the grass, but it's not essential. But you know, as I can see it, I just want to hook it out at night. So I want the centre of the pot to have moss, for extra moisture. Now what I'm going to do is hopefully thread these roots down in there, in the centre of the pot, sort of like that. And then I'm going to place the bark down the outsides of the pot, leaving the moss in the middle mainly. There'll probably be a bit of bark in the middle as well. So This moss has got so much air in it, this is not going to keep these roots soggy, but it will give them some extra moisture and hopefully start them growing nicely, because they're certainly not doing much of that at the moment. So this is, you know, this is almost like you would pot a Dracula, but the sort of moss I would have had in the past, I wouldn't have dreamt of doing this with, because it would have got wet, very wet, and stayed wet. Whereas this doesn't. This moss just doesn't hold a ridiculous amount of water. It only holds some. Now that's good enough. The fact that it holds some, and the fact that it doesn't hold too much, means roots don't get rotted in there. And the fact that it's live moss, it's probably preventing any rot anyway. Right, so that's sort of a manually positioned plant. Is it secure enough? Yeah, I think that's okay. And then hopefully we will get some new roots pushing out soon. Maybe, maybe not. But this bark at the moment's probably wetter than it will ever be again, simply because, you know, it got a good soaking with the boiling water, and now it'll be just left to dry. It means I won't have to water these for a while. So that's that. Now, have we got, he says going off camera and leaving you. Well, we may have, but I haven't got time to sort it out. I'm hoping that I've got some of the plastic hangers that just clip on the edge of the pot. If not, I'll use wire and make some wire hangers. That's one, two. Right. Now, these two are the same, but that's a lot of plant to get in one pot. So how about we have one do you know what, I could mind to put that back in a holey clay pot. Yes, I'll be back. Yeah, it's going to go in a holey clay pot, but like the other one, it's gone from a big one to a small one. So it's, you know, it's gone from not quite having enough air to probably having more than enough. That is quite a sizable root system. I'm going to have to bend that. Some of these roots are going to crack, you know, that's, I can virtually guarantee that. But providing they don't snap right off, they should branch. Just gently sort of folding it in. Yeah, I think we'll be okay like that. And then again, we will manually place these pieces in the gaps. So that way I can see that the piece of bark isn't damaging a root, because I'm placing it. Yeah? So it seems a bit tedious compared with just pouring it down the side and poking around like we normally do. But this bark lends itself to being individually put in the pot. You build it up, you know, literally like you're building a wall. You look for the next gap and then find a piece that fits that gap and just push it in. And gradually you get to the point where they start to knit together, and you know, one piece is sort of jammed up against another piece and holding it still. And as you go, you gradually trap the plant as well via the roots. But there's a lot of air gaps in here. You know, this was the problem before with the old Orchids bark. It was, the air gaps were being lost. Where the bark was starting to break down, it was compacting, which you don't normally get with bark, but you do when it's going over. So that's what was happening. That's what really was the basis of what was going wrong. It just, you know, the bark was compacting, and in the bottom of the pot was staying wet. The roots were starting to go, so the roots weren't using up the moisture. The bark was holding on to it, and everything was just going wrong, basically. Just all going wrong. And that all started off by, you know, degrading the roots in the first place by incorrectly applying that bleach treatment. So, not blame anybody else for it, but right, that's in there, that's firm, that's one done. There's 3 done in fact. Whoops! I thought that one wasn't very stable. Yeah, it needs it's got, the trouble is it's got a big piece and a little piece. I think the little piece is going to come out and go separate. Because this big piece is nicely lodged in. You know, the roots are in a good position, it's upright, it's fine. Whereas this little piece was flopping around in the middle, so we deal with that separate. Now we've got 2 tiny little pieces here. As far as roots are concerned, there's hardly anything there. And I'm not sure these are going to grow. They had rot near the base, that may still be there. I think I'm going to have to, I will put some cinnamon on the base of this, it'll just help dry it and sterilise it. But these pieces are probably not going to make it, they are probably going to rot. Oops. Need some water. Come on. These are the things, you know, when you're tired, little things like this annoy you, whereas normally you just sort of think, oh, it doesn't matter. And so when you're tired, it just, everything just gets too much. Right, so that's those 2 with a little bit of protection, not a lot, but now what are we going to do with them, because they're tall. Put them in there. There's virtually no roots. There's going to be quite a lot of bark for next to no plant. But I'll pot them deep, if you know what I mean. I'll just and I'm going to just mix a little. Again, let's have some bark and some moss and make a mix. Just thread some moss through the bark. As I say, I'm not sure it will grow, but it's, you know, just a little bit of extra moisture. And being live moss, you know, it's not going to, as I say, this moss doesn't hold a huge amount of water. You know the zombie moss, the sort of dried sphagnum that everybody uses, that holds water. That holds a sizable amount of water, physically measurable. You know, you can put some of that zombie moss in a litre of water and watch it go down substantially. You know, that's how it works. And as a consequence, if you put a plant in that and the plant hasn't got roots, it's going to stay wet a hell of a long time. And that is probably the worst thing you can do to a Cattleya. And it's not that good for any other orchid. Even orchids that need to stay moist don't need to stay soggy. And that moss does that. This is not going to stand up. This is not going to work. Well, it might do, I suppose. It's not right. It doesn't feel right. So I can lodge a few pieces next to each other, see if they'll lock into place. It's not like I'm going to damage the roots, is it? No, it's this. It's just... Right, let's do that then. I mean, if it does grow roots, it will bind itself eventually. That's going to have to do. You can tell I'm in a that'll have to do mood. So be it. Now what about you? Do you want to go in that one? Yeah, you can go in there, I think. Right, so again, a tangle of moss and bark sort of together. I mean, this one has actually got some roots, but this is my idea, is to have the large bark mixed with some of this moss to make effectively what for me is a brand new mix, something never tried before. I mean, I've got some plants standing in that moss with nothing else, but to have a moss mix with large bark, it just doesn't sound right, does it? I missed one. But what one was that then? What that was. Oh dear. We're going to have a no tag orchid, aren't we? Anyway, let's get this one done. Work on the one you're working on. Worry about that one in a minute. Right, a little bit more moss down there. And then put some bark in with it. Tuck it in. I'm potting all of these quite deep in the pot. Yeah, the idea being that if they start to root substantially, because of what they're in, they can just be lifted up and then some more media drop down the side. And they'll take to that quite nicely. You know what it is today as well, it's flipping Halloween, isn't it? Well, the clocks have changed and it's Halloween, so once I've had my meal I can turn virtually all the lights off in the house, settle down with the curtains drawn and watch a bit of telly, and nobody will think that everybody will think there's nobody in, so they won't bother pestering me. Don't get a lot of trouble with the Halloween crowd around this area. There are a few kiddies that will club together that are mates and dress up, and they will go round with their parents. Yeah, I mean, when I first moved in down here, the youths were going round, you know, teenagers were going round hammering on doors, you know, threatening to damage your car and all sorts of stuff. It was a sort of intimidation, basically. So we explained that it would be better if they didn't come here, which they then didn't. But yeah, it's something that's sort of caught on here. It's not really an English thing, Halloween. You know, the trick or treat part of it. Halloween is, you know, witches and bats and all that sort of stuff, but not the trick or treat. That's an American thing that's sort of come over and caught on. But under normal circumstances, sort of kiddies with their parents and stuff, it's okay. I haven't got enough bark to do that one. I've got a little bit left. So I'm going to put that on the mount. So I won't bother filming that. You've seen enough mounts and everything like that. So, you know, that's got them into pots and something different. And once I get some hangers on those, the beauty of them being in those sort of things is they can just be dunked in the Vander bucket. You know, I wouldn't do that with the holey clay pots because the pot would absorb too much moisture. And like I said, with the evaporative cooling with the holey clay pots, if they're very wet, you're cooling the root ball down, which is not a good idea for Cattleyas. But great for Masdevallias, but not for Cattleyas. Yeah, so, you know, they can just be dunked in the Vander bucket and lifted out. And then hopefully the moss will hold that little bit of extra moisture. The bark, if it's just dunked and lifted out, will be wet on the surface. It won't absorb much. So I'll get that fast wet dry cycle with just that little bit of extra moisture being held by the moss. And hopefully it will actually grow in between the gaps in all the bark. And the roots will follow it. So there we go, that's that. Whether that ends up as one video or two, not sure. Anyway, we shall see. At least I've got something to post sometime next week. See you next time.